So there is a silent catastrophe and tragedy that's going on right now in Afghanistan. Let me tell you about it. New York Times says, facing economic collapse, Afghanistan is gripped by starvation. An estimated 22.8 million people, 22.8 million, more than half the country's population, are expected to face potentially life-threatening food insecurity this winter. Many are already on the brink of catastrophe. So, how did this come about? Well, according to an analysis by the United Nations World Food Program and Food and Agriculture Organization, of those 22.8 million, 8.7 million are already nearing famine. That's the worst stage of food crisis. This is as a direct result of U.S. sanctions. I'll break it down further. They say in the article, practically overnight, billions of dollars in foreign aid that propped up the previous Western-backed government vanished. And U.S. sanctions on the Taliban isolated the country from the global financial system, paralyzing Afghan banks and impending relief work by humanitarian organizations. Across the country, millions of Afghans, from day laborers to doctors and teachers, have gone months without steady or any incomes. The price of food and other basic goods have soared beyond the reach of many families. Emaciated children and anemic mothers have flooded into the malnutrition wards of hospitals, many of those facilities bereft of medical supplies that donor aid once provide. Compounding its economic woes, the country is confronting one of the worst droughts in decades. The wheat harvest is 25% below average now. So, the big thing here, Western-backed government sanctions, U.S. sanctions on the Taliban, it's actually hurting the citizens and the civilians in Afghanistan, and particularly how the country is isolated from the global financial system now, which was an active decision made by the Biden administration. So, to give you a little more, the World Bank, which includes the United States, this was their token gesture. When they heard about the news, 22 million people starving, 8.7 million famine. When they heard about that news, the U.S., this is what happened. This is astounding. The World Bank, which includes the United States, moved to free up $280 million in frozen donor funding for the World Food Program and UNICEF. Good. Still, the sum is just a portion of the $1.5 billion frozen by the World Bank amid pressure from the United States Treasury after the Taliban took control. In other words, we have the ability to free up the capital to prevent the famine and the 22 million people from starving, but instead we go, well, let me give you a little taste. Instead of the 1.5 billion, here's 280 million. Make do with that. In the article, they explain how all the hospitals are overrun with starving children with their bones showing and shit. They're dying in slow motion. And the main culprit, the U.S. sanctions, particularly, because look, I have no problem saying, hey, we shouldn't subsidize them. Fine, fair enough. But what I do have a problem saying is, sanction them and isolate them from the global financial system. So in other words, others can't even help them if they wanted to. They're totally isolated from the global financial system because Joe Biden and his team decided to press a fucking button. Now, why would he do this? You're thinking, why would he do this? He doesn't want to give the Republicans an optics victory where they can go around on Fox News and say, Joe Biden's giving the Taliban billions of dollars. He supports the Taliban. Taliban Joe. That's the whole reason he's willing to sit there and let 22 million Afghans starve. Guys, by the end of this, you may have literally millions of corpses. That would be way higher death toll than the entire war. This actually reminds me of in the 90s, I think it was the 90s, the sanctions that were put on Iraq, where people were starving, and hundreds of thousands of people died, including children. The U.S. did the same thing to Iraq. Now we're doing it to Afghanistan. Look, I'm fair. I gave Joe credit for pulling out of Afghanistan, but if you can't do the obvious thing here and allow them to have connection to the world financial system, this is arguably worse than the war because more people are going to fucking die. More innocent people. So it's not even arguable, actually. It's worse than the war. It's all because Joe felt slighted that, well, the Taliban took over and they took over so quickly. I look like a fool because I said I didn't think that was going to happen. And now he's afraid of giving the Republicans a talking point of Joe's helping the Taliban, which is total bullshit. The sanctions are only hurting the Afghan civilians. But they don't care, because it's more about optics. This is a war crime. This is a fucking war crime. and they need to reverse it immediately. And if not, it's already ugly, but it's going to get much, much uglier. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.